What's up, guys? Happy Wednesday! Welcome back to the Finding Hope podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Bundy, and today I'm so excited. One of my friends out here in California from my Bible study and apparently this health and wellness place I go to, we found out that he also works there when I walked in one day. Sina is on the podcast.
Yes.
Sina is an award-winning writer, mental health advocate, and public speaker. He is renowned for his work in utilizing stories and their structures as effective tools for combating mental health issues and fostering a greater appreciation for one's personal narrative.
I come from a more so of a film and storytelling background. That's kind of what I really went to school for and studied, and kind of what I always wanted to do. And as I kind of got further into exploring the depths of like what storytelling was and kind of learning the ins and outs of like what it meant to like write and like tell stories, I learned that there's a huge psychological component to it that is kind of like the whole point. So I kind of continued like working in both and kind of just went down like this obsessive rabbit hole in psychology where I found like, okay, it's perfectly mirrored in storytelling and vice versa. And I was able to kind of use storytelling as an effective way to talk about, I personally suffer from OCD, and kind of throughout my life it's been a bit of a detriment. But when I was 18, I kind of learned what it was. And ever since then, I believe that education, like first and foremost, is the most essential tool in understanding and kind of dealing with any issue, mental health or not be. So going in from there, I just started using storytelling to kind of tackle OCD in a therapeutic manner. So, yeah.
I love that. And well, it's so cool because that's actually kind of how we bonded, just on agreeing that education and knowledge and learning more is so important. And when we clicked like in Bible study and became friends, it was because it was over some like holistic way of living. Anyone that I've ever become close to in Bible study, it's because of like their way on health and wellness. But it's really cool because anything I feel like that you have done, you heavily research, and you really are great at figuring out a new way to look at things. And that is something that I wanted him to come on the podcast for, because he has read a ton of self-help books, mental health books, all of that. And I had previously been in a book club that we read so many of those, and it was so heavy on that. But I haven't really met another Christian who had also done such a deep dive into that world, because it's so similar to Christianity, in my opinion, but it kind of removes like the source. And so it only gets you so far in my head. And when it's actually rooted in truth, it's so much more powerful. But I really loved the way that you think about things, because it's so much more from that psychological standpoint.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I believe inherently, like there's a reason that we love watching movies so much. There's a reason we love stories. Like no matter the story, it could be like a reference I like to use is Chicken Little, right? It's about a little chicken who's crying out that the sky is falling. It makes no sense, but we're like locked in and we understand the story, even though it's like so ridiculous. And it's just because not only that, we'll probably like sympathize with the chicken too, even though it's like utter fantasy. And that got me thinking, it's like there's something about stories and the reason we're attracted to them. And it's like, what is that? It's like, okay, it all follows the same journey. It's like the hero's journey, which you all, like everyone learns about that kind of in English a little bit, but they don't really dive into what that means. And it's just really like this constant cycle between peaks and troughs through like the narrative that we see our own lives. And I didn't grow up like overtly religious at all. And kind of about a year or two ago, I fell into this like kind of depressive episode and kind of like this meaningless pit. And it kind of pushed me to learn like more about like the importance of meaning and what like life's meaning is and like all that jazz. And what I found is that you need something specific to aim for, something to strive, and it's like kind of like creating this highest possible potential for yourself, and that way you like beckon this own hero's journey that you follow to get there, right? You have to be aiming towards something. Doesn't matter what that is, but you have to be specific in that aim. And kind of a couple of good friends of mine, Ozzy, I told you about Ozzy. Yeah, a good friend of mine, Ozzy.
He'll be on the podcast at some point.
He's awesome. He's a great guy. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, he kind of really embraced Christianity in its whole, and we started having discussions, psychological discussions. And as I learned more about the biblical corpus and like the stories within the Bible, the more I was able to like convert stories I've heard and an understanding of narrative and stories I knew, and to translate that into the biblical story. And the more I saw that, the more I saw that profound life values that I inherently like held as my own translated very directly to the themes of that story. So it's like, in a sense, I feel like I was valuing and living a more like secular Christian lifestyle before I even understood the text fully.
I heard this one time on another podcast, and it blew my mind. And I really started researching again because I want to know before I just accept that that's true, or I accept that that's right. But I love that you said it, because it kind of confirms this thought that somebody had, where it's so interesting, because in all of the psychology things and the mental health things, when you really start listening to people and you start reading their books and taking from them and trying to cultivate your life in those ways as those gurus or whoever the highest person is in that area, it's so fascinating, because literally it is all biblical. Like every single thing that they ever teach you in learning about a higher power or self-awareness or mindset and the power of these things, every little ounce of it is rooted in scripture. It's just they don't know that's where it's coming from. And so all of these concepts that we get so used to hearing, it is aligned with scripture. It's just when you actually deep dive into, oh, where did that person get that? Where did that original saying come from? Where did that concept come from? The more and more you start diving into the root of how that even came about, it is all based in the Bible. And so it's cool that you were like, I was already kind of living that life before I even knew God. And people that I know have been similar, once they read the Bible, then it's like, oh my gosh, it all clicks and it all makes so much sense, because you're able to use everything they've taught you, but now you know the source. And so it's just so much more abundant in making sense, and you have a clearer understanding of where it's all coming from.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I mean, completely. I mean, I think like thinking back, just like Western society as a whole is like founded upon like the principles of like the Judeo-Christian like articulation, because it's like, I mean, from everything, like again, from like the family values we have to like how we perceive our world. Like I believe that ultimately, like, and we kind of talked about this, like life in general and like throughout time and history, different civilizations or areas of times and societies have like a core value that each society has, and that value seeps into the communities, the families, the households, and the relationships to the individual, and influences what they value.
Kind of are driven by
exactly, okay, and how they like seem like, okay, like what do I value most? Is it just living a life like devout of meaning, where I just like hook up and have sex with whoever I want just so we can like reproduce and means nothing, or do I live a life like driven and fueled by becoming the most successful, gaining the most power, gaining the most money, and that creates my hierarchy of what I value and determines the relationships and what makes me sad and what makes me happy? Or do I live a life where it's like more of a Judeo-Christian standpoint, where there's an ultimate potential, an ultimate good, whatever that might be to someone, and you're aiming towards that, and you aim towards that in a humble way through humility, not pride. Because I do believe the world we live in today in the Western society, we have leaned a lot more towards the power and money one. Yeah. It's like you're aiming towards something. Yes, you might be aiming to be a better version of yourself, but it's not because of humility, it's through pride. Yeah. So I think being aware of that is the first step to moving away from it.
I want to transition into a point that Cena made recently in a conversation, and his I can't speak. His perspective was super unique on it, and so he asked the question, "What do people really mean when they say the word God?" And where did that kind of stem from, and why do you feel like that is an important question to ask?
Yeah, so I think once I started getting involved and going to study frequently, Bible study frequently, and like going to listen to different pastors give sermons and just the researching on YouTube and just like kind of being more like aware of the vernacular like people are using in secular communities about what they mean to try to like understand it, because like we all talk, we use sentences, and those words mean something within the context of other words within the sentence, right? So
Yeah.
it got me thinking, it's like, okay, based on the different people I talked to, this one word seemed to mean 100 different things based on the context of it. So then I thought it's like a really important question. It's like, what does someone mean when they use that word? Because what bothered me, to be honest, is like I went to certain situations where people were using the word God to benefactor their own like subjective interest.
Yes.
It's like, you know, the world is not going all right for me today and I want to stay in bed all day, and they're like, it's because God is telling me to. It's like, okay, what do you mean by what you say God? So I made
Or God left me, or all of these things.
Exactly. And it's like, okay, then what do you mean? Is God a cosmic butler in the sky? Is he light? Is he good? Like, what is he? Is he a man with a what do you mean? And I think that's important for people to really know what they mean and put in the work to understand that. And I think
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think definitely in LA, and I know it exists everywhere else, but it's really prominent in LA, where God is just, it can be so many different things and have so many different meanings for people, and it's very fluid. And I think where there's some just danger there is when you don't identify something, then it loses its power in actually helping and guiding you when you don't know exactly what that is. And so I think it's such a simple question, but to really just ask yourself, who is God to me? Like, when I say God, what do I mean? Who is that? And if you don't have a very clear answer, I would really encourage you to research and really dive in. And obviously, like, I believe God is Jesus Christ, is the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit through and through. Like, that is my answer. But I also think with that, you also need to still know who God actually is, and his heart and his character and his characteristics and the way he operates. And all of that comes from learning and reading the Bible. And it's so easy to feel like, oh, God's left me, or God told me to do this, or God said to do that, when you don't actually know his character. And just like a friend, like if somebody said like, Sina told me to eat McDonald's and it's going to be the best thing for me, I'd be like,
oh, no.
Absolutely not. I know him. I know like how he thinks. I know his character. I know he would never say that. But if I don't know him well enough in a relationship and I haven't spent enough time getting to know him, then that could be true for me. I'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense, even though it's completely opposite of his entire way of thinking.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I think it's important to be aware and cognizant of like what you mean from sentence to sentence when you use the word God, because I think demeans the power that word has. I mean, there's a reason it's capitalized, you know, there's a reason it's, and I just feel like it takes away, and I feel like it is a big issue with today's modern religious context in Western society, you know, and I think like putting more value on the importance of it and really understanding what we mean. And I think it's uncomfortable to do realistically. It's like, because you're asking yourself, it's like, what do I mean? What do I mean? And it doesn't hurt to ask yourself and challenge yourself that, because realistically what you'll do is you'll find yourself really like wrestling with that question. And it's like, the word Israel really means we who wrestle with God. And I think it's one of the most important things to do is like wrestle with that, wrestle with what you mean when you use the word. Because if not, it's just really, it's lazy. And then you think it's like, am I really using the word only when I want to for my own benefit? Because there's a preacher that talks at College Ave Church in San Diego. I think I told you about. He's amazing. And he's a great guy. But when he gives his sermons, he talks about the text, I believe, as it should be said.
Yeah.
Believe right or wrong, whoever may say what they want to say, he talks about it in its objectivity of the text. Like, the text says this. The text is the word. The text is the sword. I can't defy that. Like, I can't.
Yes.
And sometimes it's uncomfortable. People want to wiggle around. It's like, no, you can't do that, really.
It's cool to see your reverence for the name of God, because I've heard also people say, and I've heard pastors say, where when you just use the name of the Lord and say, oh, well, God said this to me. God told me to do this. I'm doing this because God wants me to. I'm not saying that God didn't tell you that. But what I've heard is when you say that God has said this, then it eliminates any potential for somebody to actually speak truth into it, because no one's going to question what God has told you, and no one's going to question God's authority. And so I think that's where I love how you have to be so careful in how you use the word God. And definitely I've experienced it in my friends as well, where they say something that I personally feel is very unbiblical. It does not agree with the word of God, but they'll say, God told me this. And there isn't a space to even speak truth into that, or even just question, like, hey, well, where did that come from?
Right.
Super sensitive. And same with me. I always try to watch that and change the way I speak, because I don't want to eliminate what God actually is trying to tell me by me already saying what I think he wants to. So I think with that as well, just there's a few verses that I want to read off to emphasize the importance of his name and having a reverence for it. In Luke 10:17, it says, when the 72 disciples returned, they joyfully reported to him, Lord, even the demons obey us when we use your name. And in John 14:13-14, it says, whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. And then the last one I want to touch on is Acts 4:12. And it says, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. And what I love about all these verses is it truly confirms that there is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of God. And when something has a lot of power, you want to be very careful on how you use it.
By doing so, you insinuate that you are God, right? You're taking the place, you're making these decisions. And throughout the entire story, right, there's a couple themes we see over and over again. One is sacrifice, and we'll talk about that more. But one you also see a lot is pride.
Yes.
Be careful, because in a sense, your pride is taking over, and you have no humility to say, like, I don't know. You're like, I know so much that I'm going to use the name of God to help show how much I know.
Yeah.
Kind of. And it's like, and I've been thinking a lot about like humility, and like, because I think the main theme is humility, sacrifice through humility, right?
Yeah.
Which is like, in a sense, when you're being humble,
Yes.
you're sacrificing a prideful sense of yourself to say, I don't know this. I don't know. You give that opening to make yourself maybe not look the smartest in a scenario or the most educated, because realistically you don't know, and that creates the room to grow, because you will actually learn something if you like open your arms, be like, I don't know, like maybe. So, you know, I don't know. I really caution anyone that just kind of, you know, believes that they've read all that can read and know everything about the text that can do, and they have this hardwired understanding of everything that with the religion, to really look into themselves and question what they mean when they use certain words.
Yeah, and you touched on it a couple times, and I really wanted to emphasize this about the importance of wrestling with who is God and how am I using his name. And it's okay if those things are uncomfortable. And I think you've made such a good point where that is that uncomfortability of, oh, this feels wrong, especially if you've been raised in the church for the longest time, or you've read all these things and you feel like at the point in your life you should have the answers to these questions, don't let that take away from allowing yourself to actually wrestle with it, because it does take humility. It takes so much humility. But when you can get there and be teachable, it really will transform you so much from the inside out. And every single time I've just taken on the posture of, I actually don't know. Or maybe I know a part of that, but I don't know the full thing. It allows for just so much room of knowledge to be poured into me, and it can actually sit and resonate with me, and I can figure it out. And sometimes it's uncomfortable. And if you've ever read the Old Testament, I know I wrestle like crazy when I read the Old Testament. I'm fine in the New Testament. I'm like, yeah, I know God. I'm so solid in everything. And then I read the Old Testament and I'm like, I hate this. This doesn't make sense. This is horrible. I can't believe God would ever do this. And it really forces me to question like I never thought I would. But in that creates so much growth in my faith, in my relationship with the Lord. It might feel like I'm taking steps back at the start, because when you question, it feels like, oh, that's wrong. But really, when you question, you allow for God to speak truth into that, and then you can move forward in a way clearer, stronger way than you were before.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it takes bravery, and I commend Kayla. Even as she's always listening, asking questions, even though like I know less about like everything that has to do with the church and stuff like that. She allows me to come on this pod and like talk and listen. And I think that takes bravery, seriously, and like humility, because it's not easy.
No, well, you've got a lot of wisdom.
Thanks.
Okay, so you have a really cool perspective on the story of Adam and Eve.
Basically, coming to this story from a more just like screenwriting and storytelling perspective, I really loved the story of Adam and Eve, because every story you read has like specific archetypes, right? It makes, and like even in our world, when we like go about our lives, to make all the complexity of everything, because there's so much complexity around us, right? There's so much facts, like everything means like you zoom in, this means this, you zoom out, this means that. So in order to like go through our lives in a way where we don't go insane, we have to be like, okay, this is a mentor in my life, this is something that's going to help me, this is a villain in my life, this is a trickster. Like we make these archetypes like in movies so we can understand the narrative and move through. I believe the like remnants of the story itself like make the most sense out of everything, right? Because it gives like a very understanding of what kind of like consciousness is. Consciousness is something that we don't understand at all. We don't know where it comes from or what it means, but still, like I said before, I'm able to use this thing that we don't know at all, have no understanding of, in a sentence, right? So therefore, if I'm able to use it in a sentence, therefore I use the context of what I mean and be like, okay, it has to mean something, at least in terms of what I'm saying. So when we say we have consciousness, right? We can look at things we say don't have consciousness, right? Which is like certain dogs, animals, like plants, right? They are alive, they're biotic beings, but they don't have consciousness. So what's the difference? And then you think, and it's like, okay, they live their lives in a very binary fashion, right? They live, they die, that's pretty much it, right? They sleep, they eat, it's all survival based, right? It's innate and animalistic, but our lives aren't like that, right? We have all these different pathways that our day could go. I'm gonna come do this podcast, I gotta get groceries, I gotta go on this date, I gotta do this for my career, I gotta do this video. It's not like this or
it's
that.
It's not linear. There's so much ebb and flow.
Exactly. There's so many like paths and hierarchies we can climb.
I was kind of looking up stuff on Adam and Eve, and the whole idea that consciousness and basically knowing what good and evil is, because that's what happened when Eve bit the fruit, is that her eyes were open to good and evil. And I heard an interesting perspective of somebody just saying, it's not necessarily that God didn't want them to have knowledge, it's just they drew their knowledge from an evil source. And they had the tree of life. And so they did have that there. And then they had the tree of knowledge, which Satan used to and let evil enter the world and all of that. And so it's really interesting because I feel like that desire or that idea that, oh, we can improve, we should improve, we don't just live this linear route. We are made in God's image. And so I do think that is a beautiful thing. And we should have that. But when we're doing it for our own like selfish reasons, when we're doing it apart from the Lord, that is where it is a curse. That's where it is the human condition. And so I think anything apart from the Lord is always going to be destructive. And so even in that Adam and Eve scenario, it's not like knowledge was evil. It was just they decided to have knowledge apart from the Lord. And that is where I think so much destruction happened. And that is where we still have to wrestle with that of, okay, the knowledge we have for good and evil, where is that coming from? And is it connected to God or is it connected to the world? Because the second it's connected to the world, that is where that path is just so chaotic and so confusing. Whereas when you're walking with the Lord, you might not see all the steps in front of you. It might not be the straight path, but every single step that you need to take, He is there guiding you. And so I think it's very different of having that pet scenario and taking a dog and having an owner watch out for the dog, take care of the dog, teach the dog, train the dog, versus letting the dog just run in the wild and get eaten alive. Like that is kind of how I view this consciousness and this knowledge of, are you going to let yourself be teachable and trainable and use this knowledge to benefit you?
Actually, I mean, I think boils down to, right? So consciousness, everyone has it,
Yeah.
right? So what it does, it's going to help you move forward in something, right? When you move forward in something, innately you create like a hierarchy, right? So you move from, I'm at the bottom, now I'm going to go here, right? So basically when you're talking about like these plots, as I talked about in the beginning, it's like, okay, which one are you going to choose?
Yeah.
Right? Which pathway forward? Because you're going to want to move forward in something, right? But which one is going to be the most realistically fulfilling, right? Because you see it all the time. It's like, okay, you're climbing, you're moving from point A to B and like getting money and power, and you're getting richer and you're getting more successful. But then you hear it all the time. It's like, it becomes this empty vacuum, right? You're climbing, you're becoming better, you're trying to reach the ultimate potential of what it means in a plot power viewpoint of the world, but still you're empty. So okay, maybe that isn't the right way to go about it if you're reaching the pinnacle of potential. And I think the whole point is that whatever it is, you'll never reach that potential. But it, like for example, it's like they're always looking for more, but still they're on the journey of aiming for that and they're still not getting it. But regardless, like if you're living in a plot where the ultimate thing you're aiming for is the ultimate good and potential and light and God. And when I use God in this sentence, what I think is like God, as we said before, the reason we don't want to like just throw the name out there, because it's the ultimate potential. It's the ultimate holy, right?
Yeah.
So like you want to constantly be striving to walk in the ultimate light of good and like sacrifice for those people around you. And like that might let you like feel compelled, because again, what that journey means in my mind is sacrifice for the people around you, right? In some sense, right? Because it's like you hear all about the self-help stuff, and I believe in self-help, but I believe in self-help, and we talked about this last time, if you're aiming for it in the right direction, right? Because I believe you can read all these self-help books about how to be better and stuff like that, but it falls in the more like money and power, success plot, because you're doing it inherently for a selfish reason, right? But if you know that you're bettering yourself ultimately to better the people around you, the community around you, your family, your friends and stuff like that, and that's a very different story.
Absolutely.
Right? So you have to be really...
and even in the Bible, I mean, there were people that, like David, for instance, he was a man after God's own heart. who was just living for the Lord. His eyes were solely fixed on him. And he did have the riches. He was like one of the greatest kings. He won almost every battle he fought. And he had the money, the power, the everything. And so it's not like those things are inherently bad.
Right.
But those were never what was motivating
Exactly.
him. And so it is like with the self-help stuff and all of that, it's not like those are inherently bad, but the motivation most of the time is to get yourself to this place of riches, of success, of power. And I think those are really good things, but those naturally come when your eyes are fixed on the Lord, because he does want to bless you in those ways. And when I have focused way more on the Lord and I have filled that cup before anything else, then that's when I'm a better human in everything, in my work, in the way I lead, in the way I interact with people, in my relationships, in my things that I'm stewarding, because it's just when you're striving for that, when you're striving for the wealth, the fame, the riches, all of it, the success, then you're not going to be able to probably maintain it in the ways that aren't going to leave you feeling anxious, stressed, overwhelmed, empty, depressed. Whereas when you're filling your cup with the Lord and then you have those things, your first priority was never that. Your first priority was sacrificing to, hey, how do I actually be a better business person? How do I actually be a better friend? How do I actually be a better daughter, a better son? And when that is your motive, then you naturally succeed in other ways because you're a way more equipped person for what it is that you maybe want success in.
Yeah, honestly, you hit it nail on the coffin right there. And I like to think also that it's like, okay, there's so many, again, like you said, striving for money and success and power, it isn't inherently bad. I mean, you need it to survive.
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, then why is it better really to strive for like being like God or reaching the ultimate potential? Why is that better?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, okay, by doing that, what you're doing is you're sacrificing yourself for the people around you. Okay, then let's take it a step further. Why is that good?
Yeah.
Why does that give your life meaning and purpose, right? And I think, okay, well, maybe if my entire life isn't about me, then also I am not responsible for bringing meaning to my own life,
Yeah.
right? The meaning in my life comes from the impact I have from the people around me. That's why mothers, fathers, teachers, people in these leadership positions feel so fulfilled, right? That's when they have a kid, because they understand now that their meaning to the world around isn't solely based on the meaning they bring to themselves, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I woke up today, I did this, I did it cool, I did this, so now I feel like I deserve to be here. I have a meaning, I have a purpose. But rather it's like those that impact those around them, they can have no meaning for themselves, but I'm not saying like that, but like,
but no, I know
what
I mean.
But it's like the meaning that other people that have the necessity and the meaning that other people have for them and the need other people have from them in their lives is what ultimately fills that like void of meaning, right? It's like,
yeah, for sure. And like, I feel like Jesus just replicated it so well of the ultimate sacrifice. And it was not for him and his own glory. It was not to lift him up and get all of this praise. It was absolutely devastating, and dying on the cross and suffering the most insane, intense death and sacrificing himself, sacrificing his only son. That was because he loved us so much. And so I love how you're always bringing it back down to sacrifice, because truly when you are living for the Lord, that naturally will penetrate your heart in areas that you never thought. And it's not always, oh, I'm laying down my life for something, but it can be sacrifice in your time and in the things you're doing. Maybe you're sacrificing that TV show you're watching because what it's filling your mind with is pouring out into your dynamics or your relationships. And so it is such a life of sacrifice in the best ways, where when you're able to know your identity in Christ and know how valuable you are and how worthy you are and how much he adores you, there isn't this need to prove to yourself you matter. You already know that. And so it's easy to sacrifice when it doesn't feel like you have a lot to lose. When it feels like these things aren't a part of you and they're not your identity, it's so much easier to sacrifice and to actually walk in that fullness.
Yeah, and I want to say, like, disclaimer, like, the things I say, it's like, I am not someone that's, like, practicing living a life fully in sacrifice. I live in Los Angeles. Like, I would be lying to you, right? It's such, like, a difficult thing to do. Like, I think I've thankfully been able to, like, kind of curate this roadmap where, like, things kind of make sense and, like, but it's inherently difficult, and it's not something you can say. You can't say, just like you can't, like, say, like, someone can say, like, oh, like, I am, like, a Christian, or just say you can't say that means nothing, right? You have to show it in what you do, and more importantly, you'll see it really when you see what bothers you, what's making you sad, what's making you cry. I'm not, like, living in a life, like, devout of and, like, ultimately for the sacrifice and betterment of my community. I mean, I wish I would, but again, like, going back, it's funny how good conversations go back to what you talk about in the beginning. It's like, in the beginning, you understand that whatever ultimately the world around you and the collective unconscious and everyone around you is doing, like, everyone, it's everyone around you. It's like the community is based on that, right? And it seeps into you. So I am kind of, like, trying to figure this out myself, and it's like, how do I myself, regardless of what my world and community values and stuff like that, do that? And, like, how do I not let this impact me? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yes, no, I get that. And I love how you said, ask yourself what irritates you, what makes you sad, happy, all of that. And it's so funny because sacrifice doesn't always have to be this big grand thing. Like, it's so different, I feel like, for each individual. And I want to encourage you to really seek where you might have areas in your heart that it's harder for you to sacrifice. And there was a time where I would not want to sacrifice my clothes. I did not want anyone to touch them. I didn't want anyone to borrow them. I have 2 sisters, and I was so used to them taking things all of the time without asking. And it was just this whole thing. And I love clothes. Like, fashion is my world, that I thrive off of it. And it was that I realized, oh my goodness, I need to sacrifice this. And it wasn't a huge thing, but for me, that's where the enemy had a hold of my heart. And that's where it wasn't allowing me to be the daughter that I knew the Lord created me to be in every aspect of life. And so it was a small thing, and it was a personal thing. It's probably not the same for you, but it was one of those things where I had to look inward and be like, why does this bother me? And I actually really need to release that to the Lord. And so with sacrifice, I would just encourage you to seek what you said, what bothers you, what irritates you, what upsets you, because challenging yourself to actually sacrifice those things and be generous with those things, because that's what I had to do. I had to really just constantly say yes, not care if it got ruined, not care if I never saw it again, just constantly sacrifice it. And also, I will say, the Lord just blessed that abundantly. Like, now it's crazy how many clothes I'm always getting and all of the gifting things I get to go to. But who knows, I might not have had access to that if I never allowed myself to get over my pride and get over my desire to control that area.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I want to say, if your road to God or religion or whatever it may be has been easy and you haven't had any existential crises or anything like that, you're doing it wrong. No, seriously, like it has to be uncomfortable.
It's so uncomfortable.
I know.
I want to thank you for coming on this podcast and sharing your wisdom. Do you want to share where we can find you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Sina, Sina, another A, Tadion. And then, yeah, I'll be having a TED Talk comes out soon where I kind of touch up on the same things. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much.
Amazing. And I'll link his social handles and his website in this podcast episode description. He also has, I think, weekly blogs that you kind of put out that talk on a bunch of things, a bunch of kind of what we discussed today, but a little bit more specific and a little bit more in depth. So check him out there. But have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you next Wednesday. Bye.
Thank you.